Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Vincent Blok. I'm coming from Wageningen University, and I'm very honored that I am able to present our work for this conference on science and technology ethics. I think it is good to first provide a little bit of context of my presentation before I kick off. And the starting point is that in science and technology ethics, there is a tendency to look at individual artifacts or applications. For instance, in AI ethics or in the ethics of biotechnology, we look at a particular technology and introduce all kinds of social and ethical considerations. And this trend stands in a broader historical development, namely the idea that previously traditional philosophers of technology tended to look at technology at a more broader, or what we call ontological level, namely the idea that techniques is not something connected with an individual artifact, but is more an indication of a particular time frame, the current era of the technological age. You can think of critical theory, Marcuse, for instance, or we can think of Jacques Ellul, or even Martin Heidegger's idea of enframing. And in the previous century already, people started to criticize this idea about techniques as a more broader, all-encompassing frame, because it is essentialist. It suggests that there is a sort of essence of technology that holds for all technology in the world. It's also determinist in the sense that it provides the idea that we cannot change this whole idea of technology in the technological age. And philosophers started to ask the question, what if we look at individual artifacts? And maybe we can also see more other aspects of technology if we do that. And I believe that this is a good development. And at the same time, I also believe that there is a risk that if we only focus at individual artifacts and applications, that we lose this more broader understanding of technology out of sight. And I believe that in the current age, it is relatively easy to identify these broader phenomena. For instance, if we talk about global warming, or we talk about surveillance capitalism, or we talk about the Anthropocene, then we are not, or the phenomena like digitalization, then we are not only talking about individual artifacts, but we are looking at, or we're talking about broader underlying structures that constitute the world in which we live. Now, the question is how to rehabilitate this more structural underlying phenomenon of technology in the broader sense, the ontological sense, and how to connect it with this ontic sense of science and technology ethics that is just looking at the ethical issues related to individual artifacts. That is the program, so to speak, where I am working on together with my team in Wageningen. And in this context, you have to see and to listen to this presentation as well. So the question is how to move beyond this ontic level of technology without ending up in the other extreme of an essentialist or determinist understanding of technology that we know from traditional philosophers like Ellul and Heidegger. And to make my point, I would like to focus on the particular context that is relevant today, namely the context of climate change and the Anthropocene. And the idea is that we live in a stable environment, namely the world, which is a meaningful environment in which we live and act, and we know our role and function, and that this stable environment is disrupted by climate change. That we, with this disruption, that we enter a new time frame, a new era in which humanity is the most distinguishing factor that changes, disrupts the face of the earth. That is what sometimes is called the Anthropocene, as a new era. Now, according to some of my colleagues, like Timothy Morton, this Anthropocene, this new time frame that, roughly speaking, emerged since the Industrial Revolution, that this time frame involves the end of the world. So the end of the idea that there is a whole of a meaningful environment in which we are at home, and that introduced then for him a flat ontology. You can also be critical about this idea. I have written about this topic elsewhere, and you can say, no, that is not true. There is a new era indeed, but that is a new world, a new meaningful world that is coming after the Holocene. It's the post-Holocene world, which is associated as the Anthropocene. And you can also imagine that if we are living in this Anthropocene world, which is inherently unsustainable and is also threatening human survival on Earth nowadays, then this calls for a post-Anthropocene world. And the interesting thing is that a colleague like Clive Hamilton, 2017, wrote a book in which he said, yeah, the role of humanity is mainly to create a new world, a new sustainable world that can sustain our existence, for instance. That is the notion of Anthropocene and worlds that we start with in our analysis. And I would like to bring to the fore for three hypotheses in this paper. And the first one is that you can be critical about Hamilton's idea that humans are the primary agents that constitute the world. And on the one hand, you can say, indeed, the Anthropocene is the time frame in which humanity is a geological power that rivals with the natural forces. We, as humans, since the Industrial Revolution, change and disrupt the face of the earth. We are the most determining factor that changes the face of the world. That is true, but is it necessary to accept also the idea that then humanity is the world-making capacity, the power that makes a new world? Now, you can build on the work of Marx, for instance, or Heidegger, if you argue or if you are critical about this. You can say technology is decisive. It is indeed the technological world in which we live, but at the same time, technology is not primarily a human category, as Heidegger would say. We even can say the Anthropocene world is much more connected with what Heidegger argues for in his understanding of enframing, namely the idea that the world appears as a resource challenged forth for economic exchange. This is not a world that is produced by humans, because also humans are enframed, are also challenged forth to produce and to exchange in this economic capitalist system. Capitalism is, of course, not a frame that Heidegger would use, but that is easily to introduce in this regard. So on the one hand, you can use Heidegger to question the role of humans as world creating power. At the same time, or on the other hand, you can also criticize Heidegger, because according to Heidegger, if he would, or he had to answer the question where this enframing, where this technological age came from, he then is referring to a destiny, for instance, and it has nothing to do for him with ontic innovations like new technologies that emerged since the Industrial Revolution. In this regard, Heidegger is essentialist, and you can criticize this because you can say, yeah, why should we accept the idea that that there is a destiny that inaugurates our technological era? Is it not also the case that the actual increase of emissions of the technologies since this industrial revolution indicate that technology at an ontic level can disrupt the world at an ontological level? And this brings me to the second hypothesis, namely to reject also Heidegger's essentialism and to think about other ways to understand this relation. And the idea that I would like to explore together with you is that innovations are themselves constituting this world at an ontological level. And to make my case, I refer to the work of Joseph Schumpeter, who was an economist and who never thought about philosophy or ontology. So in this regard, it's just an inspiration, and we take this idea for our own purposes. And according to Schumpeter, it is the case that innovations at an ontic level, so that means, for instance, the invention of the water mill, constitutes what he calls economic waves. And that's also what you see in the picture below, that the invention of water power, for instance, generated a new economic wave in which textile industry is important. And then a new wave emerged, which was associated with the invention of steam power, railway industry, and all that kind of things. So he is talking primarily about economic waves, but we can also extend this idea that at an individual level, an individual ontic invention does not only involve an economic wave and change in the way economy is run, but also a social economic change. For instance, if the steam power and the steam engine is invented, it on the one hand destructs the old industrial wave which is associated with water and water mills and textile industry, and it constructs at the same time a new world, namely a world which is constituted by steam, railways, and all that kind of things. It's interesting to see that if you look at the history of technology, this is not only an economic phenomenon, but also a social phenomenon. For instance, the invention of the steam train also enabled the emergence of holidays, social mobility. For instance, the invention of the steam engine made possible to make bigger factories. These factories were needed to build bigger buildings. But these steam engines also enabled train traffic to bring materials, resources to the city centers, working class to the city centers, etc., etc. So you see that also a new social phenomenon like a working class emerges due or as a result of the invention of the steam engine. Now, this is not ontology yet. This is just a history of technology that involves the emergence of new social, political, and social economic phenomena. But we can extend this idea of the creation of something new to the reality in its mobility. beings in the world are no longer a relative immobile and locally embedded material objects like stone and bronze and iron, but the invention of the steam engine destructs in a way this world, um, because the water power is dependent on locality. It should be near the river, while, for instance, while the steam power is non-local. It's a train that is fueled by steam and that is independent on location, can travel all way around. So this mobility and non-locality also holds for the resources. So people are no longer embedded in a particular location. They become mobile. Resources like stones that are needed for or iron that is needed for the constitution or the fabrication of tools and factories is no longer dependent on the place of its production or the place where it's found, because with the railway stations and railways we can move it around. Also, the laborers appear in this context as mobile energy that can help to build new things. And this constitutes what I then will call for this moment the world of steam, in which everything, people, resources, factories, etc., emerge as converted energy. The water is converted to pressured steam, humans are converted to workforce, and as energy converters. Steam engines are the converters of energies, workers are converters of energy, and this is what is actually done in this invention of the steam engine. The invention of the steam engine is a creative destruction on the ontological level. It, on the one hand, destructs the old world of locally embedded, uh, immobile resources like in the time of the watermill, and it constructs a new world of steam in which everything is a resource, a mobile and non-local resource. So what I hope, and this is primarily a thought experiment that I want to bring to the fore, and hopefully it convinces you that inventions, technologies at an ontic level, like the invention of the steam engine or the invention of the watermill, and of course nowadays we would think about digital technologies like AI or um, digital twins, that these type of ontic level inventions might have an ontological effect to the extent that they destruct an old world, the analog world, for instance, and that they create a new world, a new way of appearance of the world, and a new way of how humans deal with this new world. So innovation as an ontogenetic process of the world can be associated with the steam, with steam at an ontological level, in which the steam engine can emerge, can be applied to all kinds of machineries like the spinning mill, and can be used by humans. Innovation of the steam engine creates a world of steam and destructs the world of water. To keep it with this. Now, the interesting thing, I hope that you see this, the interesting thing here is that it provides us a way to rehabilitate this ontological level analysis, namely what happens at the level of the world, without committing to this determinist and essentialist understanding of ontology as what we encountered in the work of Ellul and Heidegger and Marcuse, for instance. So it is non-essentialistic, and that's what I would like to argue. It's also non-anthropocentric to the extent that this invention is not necessarily led by humans, but by technological evolution. And this brings me to the third hypothesis, because we are currently living in a situation where we are in need of a post-Anthropocene world. So the problem is a little bit that we are facing climate change, that this is an urgent matter, and that we have to change our lives, so to speak, and that the question is, what new wave, ontological wave, is has to occur in order to make a sustainable future possible. Now, the interesting thing here is that if we consider the idea of creative destruction, we have also a new perspective, because a pessimistic understanding of technology, like in the case of Jacques Ellul, is not necessarily anymore, because we can imagine and we can acknowledge that technology in itself has always the tendency to, on the one hand, destruct and create. There are only two ways that we can look at it. We can say that innovations or technologies are either reinforcing and entrenching the current world, or they destabilize and emancipate the world. It is also always possible to move in both directions, and that means that also the idea of humans as or control by technology and deterministic understanding of technology is no longer possible. So to conclude, the world that we live in, the Anthropocene world, is constituted by the creative destruction of technologies. And if we look for a post-Anthropocene world, we also have to look at technology, namely technology as future creation, future destructions. And that is something that you can look at if we, for instance, talk about digitalization and future technologies. With this, I do not necessarily imply that we are believers in a techno-fix solution, as if, for instance, geoengineering will solve the climate crisis. We are interested in a philosophical analysis of what is actually happening, and even if we accept that technology itself should be considered technocentric, so that means that technological evolution creates and destructs a world, that we are not necessarily in control of this process, but we are also not completely out of control, because in the process of invention, dissemination, orchestration, and further development of the technologies, always humans are involved. In this regard, I believe that you have to look at the human-technology relation still, which limits, on the one hand, an anthropocentric, but on the other hand, also a technocentric understanding. The task of humanity is to actively experiment with this emancipatory, this constructive potential of new and emerging technologies, in which the post-Anthropocene can be constituted in the future. And I believe that this is one of the main tasks of ethics in science and technology as well. I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope my talk inspired you at least a little bit. I would like to thank my team, because my talk is mainly inspired by all the intellectual friends that I have here in the Netherlands, and that help me to think about all these topics. If you are interested in our work, you can always reach out to me, and I thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye, and enjoy the rest of the conference.